Let's start with the Browns and the Texans tomorrow afternoon, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 Pacific, or as we like to call it, the traditional Houston Texans time slot. Every playoff game they've ever played in the early Saturday slot. They are 2.5-point dogs at home against the Cleveland Brownies. What you got here?
I slipped a 1.5 in on the opener when this thing came out. I also played an over 43.5 in the account as well. If you go back, like I know that there's a couple of different matchups where teams met previously in the season. So if you go back, these teams did play on Christmas Eve. It was a 36-22 Browns win over in Houston. However, I don't really pull a ton from that from the Houston side of things because that was a Davis Mills game, not a C.J. Stroud game. And so from an offensive perspective, you can't really pull a ton from it. I think the one thing that is of note, though, that is that game where Flacco went nuts, 368 passing yards. Amari Cooper went nuts and had the 265 franchise record
Right.
receiving yards, all of that. And that does show, which is what we've seen all season long from this Texans team, mostly difficult to run on, fairly easy to pass on, and then here comes Flacco into town and is able to hook up with Amari Cooper for 265 of his 368 yards in that game. Then we get this weird thing happen last week where these defensive linemen for the Texans have been beat up and trying to play hurt, and then the Colts come in, and the Colts go for over 200 yards on the ground, which is just the craziest thing because the Texans have been literally one of the top 3 teams against the run all season long in every single statistical category that there is. And you go, well, what if the Browns are going to – no, the Browns are not going to do that. The Browns have abandoned the run. They understand they can't run. Flacco's going to throw the ball 40-plus times in this game, and I think he's going to do it with a pretty good degree of success. They were the resting players team, last week, so – the Amari Cooper heel thing should be good to go. He had missed the previous week as it was anyway, so he's had multiple weeks to get that heel good to go. Elijah Moore on the concussion thing, he's good to go. Njoku battling any of his little nicks and bumps and bruises and things like that should be good to go as well for this team. And so since Flacco took over, they are leading the league by a long shot in pass rate over expected, as you would think when a guy is throwing it 40-plus times every single game. I think they go in and really do have a ton of success throwing against the secondary, which everybody has had a ton of success throwing against the secondary all season long. And in return, as good as the defense has been for the Browns, I think Stroud and the Texans are going to be able to move the ball. Like, I think that this has been a team that has shown that they've been able to show up against just about anybody that they played against all season long. And so I don't think it's crazy that this thing gets over the 43.5. I know we've bumped it to a point now where it's on the other side of that key-ish number of 44. I get it. 43, 44, we get those games where it'll land about 7% of the time on those 2 games. And so those are kind of key-ish numbers when we're talking totals. But I expect points in this thing. We'll talk about weather games. I know y'all talk about it all day long today, but this is obviously in a dome. It's a fast track. We have nothing to worry about with that whatsoever. From a prop standpoint, if anyone's looking to play props in this thing, in Week 18, must-win game obviously for the Texans, Devin Singletary got every single one of the running back touches for this team. So, it is basically his backfield now at this point. So, if you're out there and you're kind of constructing a just for fun same-game parlay thing or something or whatever, just kind of keep that in mind that it seems like they have turned to Singletary and he's their dude, moving forward no matter what. But at the end of the day, defense, if there's 4 units that we're measuring in this game, what is the best unit of the 4? It is the Browns' defense, without a doubt, easily. Now we go head-to-head on the 2 offenses. If you want to make an argument to me that they're even, okay. I think the Browns are a little bit better, but that's negligible, right? I'm okay with even. So we're still going with, okay, if the offenses are even, we still have the best defense that we're going into this game with, and it's under a field goal. And so for me, even at this number, 2.5, anything under a field goal for me on the Browns is something I think is pretty playable. And I think the Browns are like the weird team that could go on that weird Giants kind of heater, and make some noise in the AFC. I don't think the AFC is like a lock for the Ravens by any stretch.
So a couple of things. So just to clarify, you're both on the Browns and on the over.
Yep.
You are about the over without ever mentioning the thing that a lot of people have been saying this week, which is the Browns defense doesn't travel as well. You didn't make that note as well. I guess that's not part of your you're thinking.
No, and the other thing about the over, which in this we'll see how this all breaks from an injury standpoint for the Browns, but if you look, I mean, Denzel Ward popped up on the injury report. He was full practice, and then downgraded to limited, and that's obviously never good, midweek downgrades into limited. If Denzel Ward's not out there for the Browns, that obviously could lend towards an over as well. I mean, we're talking about one of the handful of dudes that are still one of the elite corners in the league that actually make a difference when they're out there, and so that's something to monitor as well, but we won't know until 90 minutes before kickoff with all of that. I mean, if I think there is a case to be made for the under, playing my own devil's advocate here, which comes along the lines of, okay, the Browns defense is good. It's still a rookie head coach with a rookie quarterback, and Tank Dell, who was a main part of that offense, that is no longer isn't going to be out there, isn't going to be that kind of go-to guy. And then Flacco, at the end of the day, as good as he's been, he still has turned the ball over a ton and things like that.
This was my question. So as you were saying, that the Browns, you think, have that New York Giants thing in them where they could go on a playoff run. What is more likely in your head, that will happen, or the likelihood of a Joe Flacco having a game where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that's really his level? And as you said, he has turned the ball over a lot already. And I would even argue some of his most beautiful touchdown highlights were the threading of a needle that was so close where I'm like, ooh, that might have been fortunate.
The other thing, too, Gil, in this is that I think that there's a scenario that also plays out where defensive coordinators are smart, these teams are smart, they've had time to kind of prepare and stuff. Like, remember, Flacco got called off the couch a month and a half ago. Like, so there wasn't, let's prepare for the Flacco-led Browns,
right,
you know?
Right.
Where they go in and say, you know what, this team just doesn't ever run the ball. So if they're just going to pass, and they're just going to pass all of it, let's invite them to run the ball, which they don't do well, and they don't do efficiently. And so let's just sit here and play in these kind of like weird shell defense. And I think that there is a chance that they run into that somewhere along the way as well, and then Flacco just can't handle the fact where it's like, oh, they know I'm throwing every single time. They are trying to prevent me from throwing every single time, and with that, we're having to get out of our rhythm here, get out of the offense that we've been fairly successful with so far. That said, I don't think it's the Texans that are able to do that to them. I think it's probably whatever happens to them down the line.
Sounds like, if I'm reading between the lines, you think the Browns a good run into the postseason is more likely than a Flacco bomb, or just an explosion, if you will, in a bad sense.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.